During a recent interview, Steph Curry spoke about something many fans didn't know about his father, Dell Curry. What he revealed left even the most seasoned fans emotional. Some stories deserve to be told, not for what they mean to sports, but for what they mean to humanity, said the ESPN host while introducing the special segment about the Currys. The camera then focused on Steph's face, normally radiant with his characteristic smile, now thoughtful, as if navigating memories he rarely shared. Charlotte, North Carolina, 1990. A modest house in the suburbs with a driveway that ended in a slightly tilted basketball hoop. It was there that all the magic began, long before the spotlights, the NBA championships, and the three-point records. Dell Curry would arrive home late after games with the Charlotte Hornets. On nights like that, most parents would collapse exhausted into bed. But not Dell. Steph, only 8 years old, would already be waiting at the entrance. Even with his body aching after 48 minutes of professional play, Dell would walk to the garage and turn on a small lamp that illuminated only the area under the basket. "My father never talked much," narrated Steph, his soft voice contrasting with the intensity with which he plays. "He taught me basketball without grand motivational speeches. It was all about consistency and work." Those moments under the yellowish light of the garage formed the fundamentals not only of Steph's perfect shot, but of his character. Dell wasn't a man of many words, but he transmitted his most important lessons through actions. "He never told me, 'You'll be great someday.' Instead, he showed me, day after day, what dedication meant," confessed Steph. There was a ritual between them that was never documented by any camera. Before each home game Dell played, he would find Steph in the corridors of the arena, away from the lights and the public. There, he would crouch down until his eyes were level with his son's and simply say, "Watch the game, not just the points." Steph would nod, as if receiving a sacred secret. I would sit on the bench, near the exit to the locker room, and while everyone cheered with each three-pointer my father made, I was studying his positioning, how he moved without the ball, how he communicated with his teammates, recalled Steph, his eyes fixed on some distant point, as if he could see those memories unfolding. What few knew was that Dell frequently sacrificed his hours of rest to work with Steph. After night games, when the boy should have been sleeping, Dell would meet him in the garage, still in his suit, just with his tie loosened. "Many times I wanted to ask if he wasn't too tired," said Steph, with a nostalgic smile. "But something told me not to question it." Those moments were too precious to be interrupted with doubts. It was on one of those nights that Dell made the promise Steph would never forget. After a particularly difficult training session, when young Curry was frustrated about not being able to perfect a move, Dell placed his hands on his son's shoulders and spoke the words that Steph would carry throughout his life. He looked me in the eyes and said, "Talent may fail, but work doesn't. You don't need to be me, you just need to be the best version of yourself." Steph paused, visibly moved. In that moment, he freed me from the expectations of being Dell Curry's son. As the first chapter of the interview came to an end, a rare image was shown. Dell Curry, normally stoic and controlled in the stands, being captured by a camera at the exact moment he whispered to himself while watching Steph play for the first time in the NCAA. "This kid is going far beyond what I dreamed." What nobody knew yet was that that phrase carried a much greater weight than any fan could imagine. The truth behind those words would only be revealed years later, when Steph finally decided to share the side of his father that the world never knew. The Charlotte Christian School gymnasium was almost empty when Dell Curry entered to watch another basketball practice. He sat discreetly in the stands, observing his son, Steph, then 16 years old, among visibly taller and more physically developed players. "I never had the typical physique for basketball," admitted Steph during the interview. "At that time, I looked 2 years younger than my teammates. Coaches looked at me and saw only a skinny kid with a famous surname." What many didn't know was that Dell was living his own internal battle. As a former professional player, he recognized his son's exceptional talent, but also understood better than anyone the almost insurmountable obstacles that Steph would face. "One night, after a particularly difficult game, my father did something that surprised me," said Steph with teary eyes. "He took me to a drive-thru, ordered 2 milkshakes, and parked the car in an isolated place. I expected a motivational speech, but what I received was something much more valuable." Dell took a deep breath and did what many parents would have avoided. He was brutally honest with his son. He told me, "Steph, you have a gift for this game that I never had. Your court vision, your hand-eye coordination, your sense of timing, they're extraordinary. But I need you to understand one thing. The world will doubt you at every step. Not because you're not good enough, but because you don't look like what they expect. And the question you need to answer is not whether you can prove them wrong, but whether you would continue playing even if you never could." Steph remained silent, sipping his milkshake while absorbing his father's words. "That was the first time my father shared his own insecurities with me," revealed Steph. "He told me how, throughout his career, he carried the fear of not being good enough, even when he was among the best shooters in the league. How he questioned his place in the locker room after every bad game. It was the first time I saw my father not as Dell Curry, the NBA player, but as a man with vulnerabilities." This conversation marked a turning point in the relationship between father and son. Dell had decided that, instead of protecting Steph from harsh reality, he would prepare him to face it. When the college recruitment process began, Steph's frustration was palpable. Despite his exceptional performance in high school, major universities systematically ignored him. Virginia Tech, where Dell had been a legend, offered only a walk-on position, no scholarship. "What many people don't know is that my father turned down an important position as a sports commentator at that time," revealed Steph. "It was a lucrative contract with a major network, but he declined it because he knew he would need to be present at all my games at Davidson." Dell's decision wasn't just about supporting his son. It was a silent acknowledgement that Steph was about to embark on an unprecedented journey and would need an emotional anchor who truly understood the weight of expectations. During Steph's years at Davidson, away from the spotlight of national media, Dell became a constant presence. Not to pressure or instruct, but to simply be there. "We had these late-night phone conversations," remembered Steph. "I questioned everything, my choices, my future, whether I was on the right path. And my father, who was always a man of few words, simply listened to me, sometimes for hours. He didn't offer quick solutions. He just gave me space to process my own thoughts." The turning point came during the NCAA tournament of 2008. Davidson, a small, little-known college, led by an underestimated point guard, faced Georgetown, a powerhouse of college basketball. Nobody gave Davidson a chance. Before that game, my father sent me just one message. "Remember who you are, not who they expect you to be." Steph Curry would explode in that game, scoring 30 points and leading one of the biggest upsets in March Madness history. When the final buzzer sounded, cameras captured Dell in the stands, with uncontained tears silently streaming down his face. After that game, when everyone had already left, "I found my father in the empty corridor of the arena," said Steph, his voice almost a whisper. He hugged me tight and, for the first time, admitted, "I was wrong, Steph. Not about your talent, but about your limits. You don't have any." What Steph didn't know, and would only discover years later, was that Dell had kept every rejection letter from universities that didn't offer scholarships to his son. Not as a reminder of failure, but as a testimony to the resilience that would define Steph's career. "That moment in the corridor wasn't about basketball," concluded Steph. "It was about a father recognizing that his son had found his own identity, beyond the shadow of the Curry name." What none of the millions of fans who watched that improbable Davidson run could know was that, behind the scenes, Dell Curry was facing his own silent battle. One that he would keep secret for the next few years, even as the spotlights began to shine intensely on his son. Steph Curry's entry into the NBA wasn't the fairy tale that many imagine in retrospect. Selected as the 7th pick by the Golden State Warriors in 2009, he quickly faced his first major obstacle: recurring ankle injuries that threatened to derail his career before it truly began. "That was the darkest period of my professional life," confessed Steph in the interview. "I questioned everything, whether my body could handle the NBA, whether the critics were right about my physique, whether I had made a mistake believing I could go so far." What few knew was that, while Steph faced these doubts, Dell Curry was waging his own battle behind the scenes. "I recently discovered something about my father that left me speechless," revealed Steph, his voice trembling with emotion. "During those years of injuries, while I was going through multiple ankle surgeries, my father was secretly consulting medical specialists across the country, seeking the best opinions and possible treatments." The truth, which Dell had kept for years, was even more impressive. He had mortgaged his house in Charlotte to ensure that Steph had access to the best orthopedic surgeons and rehabilitation programs in the country. When I confronted my father about this, he simply shrugged and said, "I did what any father would do," said Steph, shaking his head in disbelief. "But the truth is, he risked his financial security without ever telling me, without ever asking for recognition." While Steph struggled to establish his place in the league, Dell maintained a detailed notebook of each of his son's games. Not just statistics, but meticulous observations about technique, decision-making, and opportunities for improvement. Never to criticize, but to be prepared in case Steph asked for advice. "I found this notebook by accident during a visit to his house," explained Steph. "Pages and pages of notes, diagrams, analyses. When I asked about it, he almost seemed embarrassed, as if he had been caught doing something. He said, 'I never wanted to impose my opinion, but I always wanted to be prepared, in case you needed me.'" What made this dedication even more extraordinary was that, during this same period, Dell was silently navigating the end of his own identity as a professional player. Seeing his son take on the mantle of the Curry shooter represented a complex mix of pride and nostalgia. "My father never talked about how difficult it was for him to leave the game," reflected Steph. "I now understand that, while I was building my identity in the NBA, he was learning to redefine his. And yet, instead of making this transition the center of attention, he focused all his energy on supporting me." As Steph's career took off, with MVPs and NBA championships, the public became accustomed to seeing Dell in the stands, with cameras frequently capturing his reactions to his son's feats. What no one perceived was the silent transformation occurring in the relationship between father and son. "There was a crucial moment in 2015, during our first title run," recalled Steph. "I was going through a series of difficult games, and everyone expected my father, the former NBA player, the shooting specialist, to give me some magical technical advice. Instead, Dell did something surprising. He stepped back. He called me one day and said, "Steph, you don't need me to be your coach anymore. You've already got this. Now, you just need your father." Steph's eyes glistened as he recalled. That's when I realized my father had made the most difficult transition of all. From being the mentor to being simply the father. Dell's confidence in his son was so deep that, during one of the most important series in Steph's career, he made a decision that caught many by surprise. For the first time, he didn't attend a crucial playoff game. I was confused and even a little hurt when I realized my father wasn't in the stands that night, admitted Steph. After the game, I asked why he hadn't come. His response left me speechless. "Because you didn't need my presence to add more pressure. You needed to know that, regardless of the outcome, I would be proud." It was at this moment that Steph began to realize there was much more to his father's story than the public ever imagined. Dell Curry, the man the world knew as a sharp shooter in the NBA and a proud father in the stands, carried a burden that he kept hidden from everyone, including his own son. "I started noticing small things," continued Steph. "How he occasionally disappeared during games, or how he rested more than normal when he visited us. How he discreetly took medications when he thought no one was looking." What Steph didn't know yet was that his father was facing a significant health challenge, one that he had decided to face alone, so as not to divert focus from his son's meteoric rise. One day, I borrowed his car and found several medicine bottles in the glove compartment, revealed Steph. It was the beginning of a conversation that would forever change my understanding of who Dell Curry really was. The third chapter of the interview ended with Steph looking directly at the camera, his eyes reflecting a mixture of admiration and sadness. "I think we spend our entire lives thinking we know our parents," he said softly. "But sometimes we only discover who they really are when we finally realize what they chose not to show us." The interview room fell into absolute silence. The cameras continued filming, but the technicians and producers behind them had stopped any movement. The interviewer leaned slightly forward, as if fearing that even his breathing could break the fragility of the moment. Steph Curry, the man the world knew for his unwavering confidence, for his easy smile, and for his ability to make impossible shots, now seemed vulnerable in a way that no one had witnessed before. "About 2 years ago," began Steph, his voice soft but firm, "I went back to Charlotte after a series of away games. I didn't tell anyone I was going." He paused, took a deep breath. "I wanted to surprise my father, maybe take him out to dinner, as we occasionally did." Steph described how he arrived at Dell's house in the early afternoon, using the key he always had. The house was quiet. He called for his father, but got no response. Eventually, he found Dell sitting alone on the back porch, staring fixedly at the backyard, where an old basketball hoop still remained, now faded by time. "He didn't hear me arrive," continued Steph. "And for the first time in my life, I saw my father completely disarmed. His face was pure pain, not the controlled expression he always maintained in public, but something raw, exposed." Steph swallowed hard. He was holding a bottle of medication, and there were others beside him. The moment that followed would forever change the relationship between father and son. When he saw me, my father did what he always did. Tried to immediately compose himself, hide the medicines, smile as if nothing was happening. Steph shook his head, recalling. "But this time, I didn't let it go. I sat beside him and said, "Dad, enough. Whatever burden you're carrying, you don't need to do it alone anymore." What unfolded was a confession that left Steph deeply shaken. My father was diagnosed with spinal stenosis and disc degeneration shortly after retiring from the NBA, revealed Steph, his words now coming out with more difficulty. The years of jumping, falling, and repetitive impact of professional basketball had taken their toll. Doctors told him he would need a series of complex spine surgeries and a long rehabilitation process, with significant chances of still having chronic pain for the rest of his life. Looking directly at the camera, Steph said what had broken his heart. The initial diagnosis came when I was in my sophomore year of college, precisely when my career was beginning to take off at Davidson. The most impactful revelation, however, was yet to come. My father made a decision at that moment that I only fully understood that day on the porch, continued Steph. He decided to postpone any invasive treatment or anything requiring long recovery periods. Doctors recommended immediate surgery, but he opted for a regimen of pain medication and minimal physical therapy. Steph's eyes welled up when he explained Dell's reasoning. He told me he couldn't risk being in recovery during crucial moments of my career. What if I were in the hospital during your NCAA tournament? What if I couldn't be present when you were drafted? What if post-surgery medications made me too groggy to watch your first NBA games? The studio remained in sepulchral silence as Steph took a deep breath, visibly struggling to maintain his composure. When I questioned his decision, he told me something I'll never forget, said Steph, his voice almost a whisper. He said, "Steph, when you were born, I made a silent vow that I would never let my shadow darken your path. Each step of your journey would be illuminated by love, not obscured by worry." The enormity of this sacrifice only became clear to Steph when Dell finally revealed the extent of his condition. He opened his shirt and showed me the scars from epidural injections he regularly received, continued Steph. Dozens of them, aligned along his spine, each one representing a day, a week, a month in which he endured pain in silence so that I could proceed without the weight of his condition. Steph then shared details that had never been publicly revealed. How Dell meticulously planned his medications so that the maximum effect coincided with the times of Steph's games. How he developed breathing techniques to control pain during long periods sitting in hard arena chairs. How he practiced neutral facial expressions in front of the mirror to ensure cameras never captured his discomfort. "There's one specific night that now haunts me," confessed Steph, his voice trembling. Game 7 of the 2016 finals against Cleveland. We lost. It was devastating. After the game, my father came to the locker room to console me, to remind me there would be other opportunities. Steph paused, taking a deep breath. What I didn't know, what nobody knew, was that morning he had suffered a particularly severe episode. His doctor had insisted that he go to the hospital immediately. He refused. Steph's eyes shone with contained tears. He flew to Oakland anyway, sitting on a plane for hours, refusing stronger painkillers because he wanted to be mentally present for me in case I needed him. The interviewer, visibly moved, delicately asked why Dell had chosen this path of silence and sacrifice. When I confronted my father about this, answered Steph, discreetly wiping away a tear, his response was simple and devastating. The moment I became your father, I decided that your journey would always be more important than mine. You were creating your story, and I didn't want my pain to become part of it. Steph then shared a particularly painful memory. After his first NBA championship in 2015, he looked for his father in the crowd to share that moment. Cameras captured the emotional embrace between them, a moment that became iconic for basketball fans. "What nobody saw," said Steph, "was that my father almost fainted from pain after that hug. He smiled for the cameras, posed for photos, gave proud interviews, and then, when no one was looking, my brother Seth helped him get to the bathroom, where he vomited from pain before taking an extra dose of medication. 15 minutes later, he was back, smiling by my side as if nothing had happened." The interview then took an even more personal turn when Steph revealed how he discovered the extent of his father's financial sacrifice. "During our conversation on that porch, I discovered something that left me completely floored," confessed Steph. "To ensure he could be present at every important moment of my career, my father refused an experimental treatment promised by health insurance. The reason? It would require 6 months of recovery at a specialized center in Denver." Steph shook his head in disbelief. "He told me, 'It was during your rookie season. You were struggling to prove your worth. How could I disappear at just that moment?'" What made this revelation even more powerful was the fact that Dell never used his condition as a tool for emotional manipulation or to gain sympathy. Many people, when going through something like this, would naturally share their struggle, not for pity, but for human connection, reflected Steph. "My father gave up even that. Comfort. He carried this burden completely alone for almost 20 years. As the interview progressed, Steph revealed a profound change in his relationship with his father after that afternoon on the porch. "That day, after hours of talking, we made a pact," explained Steph, now with a new firmness in his voice. "He promised to no longer hide his condition, no longer sacrifice his health for my emotional comfort. And I promised to honor his journey as completely as he had always honored mine." The first manifestation of this new pact was Dell's decision to finally have the surgery he had postponed for so long. "We scheduled the operation for the off-season," said Steph. "I remember being beside him when he woke up from anesthesia. The first thing he said was, 'I'm so relieved to not have to pretend anymore.'" Steph's eyes shone with the memory. "It was the first time I saw my father truly vulnerable, and paradoxically, he never seemed stronger to me." This transformative experience led father and son to an initiative that remained secret until that interview. "We realized our story wasn't unique," explained Steph. "There are fathers and mothers across the country, across the world, making similar silent sacrifices for their children. Not just in professional sports, but in all fields of human endeavor." That's how the Curry Foundation for Athlete Health and Wellness was born, with a special focus on the Silent Legacy Program, an initiative dedicated to parents of athletes facing health challenges. The program provides everything from adapted transportation for parents with reduced mobility to watch their children's games, to counseling for families navigating the complex emotional dynamics of high-performance sports, detailed Steph. But the most touching element of the program was the Circle of Trust, support groups where parents of athletes could openly share their own struggles, fears, and hopes. "My father leads one of these groups in Charlotte," revealed Steph with evident pride. "Seeing how he transformed decades of silent suffering into shared wisdom, it's deeply inspiring." The interview then culminated with a final revelation that Steph had saved until that moment. "There's something I haven't shared yet," he said, leaning forward as if confiding a secret to the world. "After our conversation on that porch, I helped my father review some old boxes in the attic. We found a diary that he had kept since my first days playing basketball." Steph took a deep breath before continuing. On the night before my first NBA game, he wrote something that I only discovered almost 15 years later. Steph took a small folded piece of paper from his pocket. With his permission, I would like to read it to you. Carefully unfolding the paper, Steph read the words written by his father's hand. Today, my son Steph will play his first NBA game. The doctor told me this morning that the pain will probably never completely disappear, that I need to consider surgery now, before it's too late. But how can I do that now? How can I risk missing a single moment of this journey? Doctors don't understand that there is a much greater pain than physical. The pain of not being present when your son needs you. No matter what happens to my spine, to my discs, to my body, as long as I can sit in those stands and watch my son living his dream, I will continue doing whatever it takes. Maybe one day I'll tell him. Maybe one day he'll understand that sometimes the deepest love is the one that remains unspoken, unseen, but constantly present. For now, I'll take my medicines, do my secret therapies, and be there, smiling in the stands as if nothing else in the world mattered. Because, honestly, nothing else does. When Steph finished reading, there wasn't a dry eye in the studio. He carefully folded the paper and returned it to his pocket, close to his heart. After discovering all this, many small memories began to make sense, continued Steph, finding his voice again. How he always chose seats near the access tunnels in arenas. How he frequently disappeared briefly during games. How he always brought a special cushion to sit on. Steph revealed that these discoveries led him to see his father in a completely new light. When I think about all the moments my father was in the stands, the draft, my first NBA game, my first All-Star game, the championships, now I see something completely different, said Steph. I don't just see a proud father. I see a silent warrior who transformed his pain into a testimony of love. In the months that followed that conversation on the porch, Dell finally agreed to undergo a series of procedures to improve his quality of life. Recovery was slow, but significant. Seeing my father walking without visible pain for the first time in decades was... Steph paused, searching for the right words. It was like watching a different kind of miracle. Not the kind that happens on courts with impossible shots in the final seconds, but the kind that happens when someone finally allows themselves to receive the same love they have always given so freely. The interview was approaching its end, but Steph had one last thought to share. You know, people often ask me what was the most important lesson my father taught me, reflected Steph, with a new depth in his voice. For years, I thought it was about basketball, about shooting, positioning, or competitive mentality. Then I thought it was about hard work, perseverance, or faith. Steph paused, looking directly at the camera with eyes bright with emotion. But now I know it was something much deeper. He taught me that our greatest impact comes from what we choose to do without recognition, from the battles we fight when no one is watching, from the love we give without expectation of return or acknowledgement. A single tear rolled down Steph's face, but he made no move to wipe it away. My father used to tell me that character is revealed not in what we do when everyone is watching, but in what we do when no one is looking, he continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. Dell Curry lived that truth every day, and only now do I fully understand the depth of that legacy. The interview concluded with recent images of Dell and Steph together at a foundation charity event. Dell, now using a discreet cane, something he finally allowed himself after years of denial, and Steph, with his arm gently supported on his father's back. The contrast with their previous public appearances was notable. There was a new authenticity, a new intimacy between them. "What changed wasn't just how I see my father," explained Steph in the final words of the interview. "What changed was how I understand love, not as an emotion or a feeling, but as a daily decision, a constant choice to place someone's well-being above your own." As the studio lights dimmed softly, the camera captured one last image: father and son walking together out of the set, no longer as mentor and apprentice or legend and heir, but as two men who had found a new level of connection through shared vulnerability and mutual respect. The world now knew Dell Curry's true legacy. It wasn't in the three-point shooting records he established during his time in the NBA. It wasn't in his work as a commentator or in the sports statistics that would define his professional career. His true legacy was in the silent example of a father who chose to place his son's well-being and dreams above his own pain, comfort, and recognition, who found strength not in invulnerability, but in the willingness to endure whatever was necessary so that his son could shine without shadows. And perhaps that is the greatest teaching that Steph Curry continues to carry with him, now aware of the full weight of its meaning. That true greatness lies not only in the lights of the spotlights, but in the invisible foundations built through unconditional love, silent sacrifice, and unwavering integrity.